Sometimes Destiny 2 players can get caught up with only using weapons from raids, dungeons, and endgame content, because we are to assume that these are the best weapons in the game after all. The hardest content should reward the best loot. Or should it? You see, I've noticed as of recently that Destiny 2 has been including many world drop or other sourced loot that is incredibly effective that people seem to be glossing over just because of the fact that it's sourced from there. It's because of this that I am currently making this video. I would like to highlight 4 world drop weapons that are extremely effective at filling their own niche. And they're as easy to get as world drops, which is actually harder than it sounds, but we'll get into that later. I am going to note that I'm talking about all of these weapons in the context of PvE and not PvE. For the sake of this video, I will not be discussing any potential roles for PvP. There will be chapters for this video at the start of each weapon's introduction, as well as timestamps in the description for easy access to each weapon. First off, I would like to simply define world drops. World drops are any item in Destiny 2 that doesn't have a specific drop location. For example, the Fang of Ir-Yût's scout rifle only drops from the Crota's End raid, while other weapons like world drops will drop from anywhere in the environment, such as legendary engrams, prime engrams, or other sources. The first weapon I would like to talk about is the Crux Termination 4. The Crux Termination 4 is the newly added aggressive frame rocket launcher that is a world drop. Now, the Crux Termination 4 has one of the craziest left slot perk pools that I have ever seen, sporting insanely popular perks like Clown Cartridge, Reconstruction, Envious Assassin, which are all fan favorites, as well as a new perk that has not been seen on a single rocket launcher since the release of the game, Slide Shot. And some of you will immediately know why this is a big deal, while others may be wondering. Who cares about Slide Shot when Reconstruction or Envious Assassin are in the same slot? But I can guarantee you that Slide Shot is worth picking up. Slide Shot will actually increase this rocket launcher's damage per second far above what it could previously be, because Slide Shot reloads each time you slide. While the right column is less exciting, there are still some options to talk about. First up, we have Surrounded. Now, while I'm personally not a fan of Surrounded in all circumstances, I'd be stupid to deny the fact that 30% damage buff while surrounded is extremely effective. And in a situation where you can be surrounded for extended periods of time during damage phases, this perk is great, and I think that if you get a roll with Surrounded, you should probably keep it, just in case. But I'm really here to talk about Explosive Light and Bipod. These perks are pretty well known at this point because they're used on most of the meta rocket launchers in the game. And while Explosive Light has fallen a bit out of favor in exchange for Bait and Switch more recently, I believe that Explosive Light still holds very much warrant for use. Besides, by the time you've slapped on 3 Surge mods and have Explosive Light procced, this rocket launcher will hit harder than a stepdad after 30 high noons on a Saturday evening. So now we talk about Bipod. A lot of people are not big fans of Bipod because of the damage reduction, but recently Bipod has been changed so that its damage reduction is lower, meaning that the perk is actually somewhat viable now. Bipod will increase your launcher's ammo reserves as well as its mag size, at the cost of blast radius and reload speed, and damage. Overall, with the left column perks being really effective and the right column perks not being too shabby either, Crux Termination can lead to a pretty effective rocket launcher roll most of the time, especially for players who may not have access to raids or dungeons in the same way that others do. Next up, I would like to talk about a world drop SMG. This SMG is known as the Parabellum. Now, when I first got the Parabellum, I kind of wrote it off because, of course, I already have multiple solar SMGs that will fulfill that role for me. But nonetheless, the Parabellum slipped into my inventory a couple times because I saw perk rolls that were interesting to me. For example, the new perk Permeability was one that caught my eye. If you remember, Osmosis is a perk that allows you to change the element of your weapon based on the grenade of your subclass. Permeability does this same thing, but with your class ability. Only that's not the interesting part. If you remember, Osmosis was only available on kinetic weapons, meaning the weapon wasn't elemental, and Osmosis was making it elemental. Permeability is found on multiple elemental energy weapons, meaning that we now essentially have dual element legendary weapons in Destiny 2. Of course, that's not where it ends for the Parabellum. It also has access to new perks like Heal Clip and Attrition Orbs. In the left column, some potential roles to look out for are Heal Clip, Stats for All, Enlightened Action, and Permeability. In the right column, we have Attrition Orbs, Deconstruct, Frenzy, Adagio, Under Over, and Dynamic Sway Reduction. Now, while I believe Attrition Orbs, Frenzy, Adagio are all good perks, you're really not going to want to go with Deconstruct, Under Over, or Dynamic Sway unless you have a specific build in mind for this weapon. Now, while this may be biased due to the seasonal perks making solar weapons ignite and explode and radiant and scorch everything in your path, I do think this weapon still has merit. Heal Clip's recent buff has made Heal Clip much more of an enticing perk to use, as it now gives you Cure Times 2, essentially filling most of your health after one specific reload. And while this may not be super useful on a solar build where you're already getting restoration 90% of the time, I found that using this can actually be pretty fun on builds where you don't usually get to have a lot of restoration or healing anyway. I also recently took the Parabellum into Pantheon to test it out. This essentially fills the role of a support weapon, and depending on your playstyle, you could remove your healing entirely from your build in order to use this weapon instead. Overall, if you get a Parabellum with Heal Clip or Permeability, I'd say at least check it out before you toss it away into the trash. While we're on the topic of solar weapons with Heal Clip, it would be a shame not to bring up the Heliocentric sidearm. This new sidearm sports 360 rounds per minute with a very interesting perk pool to boot. First of all, we talk about the left column, where we have Heal Clip, Enlightened Action, and Demolitionist as all enticing perks that you may want to use. And in the right column, perks such as Incandescent, Heal Clip, Adrenaline Junkie, Surrounded, Precision Instrument, and Frenzy. You pretty much cannot go wrong in the right column of this sidearm. While I still haven't gotten my own personal god roll of the Heliocentric, I found that using Heal Clip, Incandescent, or any of these new perks has been very fun. It's also just a nice change of pace to use sidearms for once, as I haven't used a sidearm since Season of Arrivals. And while this may be the final weapon I'm going to be talking about, I most certainly saved the best for last. If you've heard of this weapon, then you already know what I'm talking about. But for those unaware, I am talking about the Ros Arago 4. The Ros Arago is a 600 RPM void auto rifle that sports a pretty solid left column, with repulsor brace, subsistence, permeability, and rewind rounds being an option. And while I'd love to say the right column is just as good with perks like a golden tricorn, surrounded, and attrition orbs, to be honest, you're really only going to want one perk in this column, and that's Onslaught. This is the first 600 RPM auto rifle to be able to roll this perk. I can understand your initial hesitation. Of course, what's so special about a 600 RPM auto rifle with a perk that makes it shoot faster? And while I understand why you feel that way, let me show you this clip. You see, while the Ros Arago lacks perks like incandescent or destabilizing rounds that may synergize better with specific classes, Onslaught doesn't care about synergy. This workhorse of a weapon can mow through adds in mere seconds once it ramps up. And not to mention, in the left column, we have perks that directly synergize like subsistence or rewind rounds, if you're interested. Of course, to get these perks, you're going to have to get the weapon to drop. And that's sort of where the problem comes in for a lot of these weapons. You see, these world drop weapons may be extremely effective in what they do, but getting them can sometimes be a nightmare. And while you can farm certain ones that didn't come out this season from lost sectors, this rotation won't be available for the Ros Arago, the Crux Termination, or the Parabellum yet. So if you are interested in these weapons, keep an eye out when you see them drop, for now. But they will be available in lost sectors in Witch Queen. Witch Queen? God damn. They will be available in lost sectors following the release of the final shape. So I honestly recommend that you farm them when that DLC comes out, as opposed to now. Following what I've said, I'll leave you with this. While these weapons may be overlooked because of their spotty availability and not common names, The one thing these weapons should not be overlooked for is their power. Because the Ros Arago, Heliocentric, Parabellum, and Crux Termination are all extremely strong weapons, despite being fucking impossible to get the god roll. Do you know how many fucking Crux Terminations I have gotten? I have yet to see a slide shot roll, and I swear to fucking god. Anyway, I believe it was Muhammad Gandhi that once said, "Just be patient, because 99% of gamblers quit before their first big win." We must remain ever vigilant, as one day, that Parabellum drop you get may just be a god roll that you've always wanted. Or you won't, and your thirst for greatness will lead you to your eventual demise, as your family will have to carry on your legacy because your gambling addiction has made you estranged.